but the parts are patriarchy. Then we look at gender violence through those 4 prisms. Interrogation through the lens of patriarchy, men's experiences as taken as the norm and women's experiences as the othered. Basically, what Dr. Deche wanted to communicate to us is that in Kenya, 45% of women and 44% of men aged between 15 and 49 years have experienced one form of gender violence. The nature of sexual gender-based violence is escalated, especially during the election cycle and during the COVID containment measures. The efforts to strengthen the institutional and legislative mechanisms in the post-2010 constitutional setting has failed to translate into preventative and effective responses to sexual gender-based violence. Little seems to have been learned after the aftermath of the 2007 and 2008 post-election violence. ERSGBV was reported in 2013, 2017, and 2022, election-related violence. Incidences have been captured by the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights, FIDA, and this paper makes reference to the captured data. Although the 2022 elections were touted as the least violent, FIDA sent out monitors in 47 counties to monitor incidences of gender-based violence. According to the report, the period between May and July, verbal abuse and hate speech were prevalent and cyberbullying. Rape was still reported, but at below 1%. The condoning of the slap, Dr. Deche argues that amounts to a sexual violation. There's need for baseline sensitivities on gender relations by both the IEBC and justice sectors, from the police to the judiciary, enhance access to justice, to which include more intentional interagency cooperation and referral mechanisms between the legal, medical, and security agencies. There are law reform. Of course, we need to bring in sexual offenses within the Election Offences Act. We need to effect tougher stance so that we deal with impunity. Gender concerns during elections should not be ghetto-sized. Trust Dr. Deche to give you such a term. Ghetto-sized or treated as footnotes or left to the magnanimity of civil society. We need to do more. That's the basic argument. We need to bring women experiences, fears, and hopes during the election cycle to the fore and deal with them, mainstream them, so that, insofar as security is concerned, so that these experiences are not suppressed, minimized, or ignored, or derided. Thank you. We'll keep it short that way. That's Dr. Deche's presentation. We'll have it when she completes her full paper. Thank you very much. Now, I switch on to, my tentative role today. We have presentations that's supposed to follow. Ladies and gentlemen, military precision, 10 minutes exactly, ni moins, ni plus. No more, no less. I start with the extreme end, Mr. Luania. 10 minutes. Ian, no? Oh, Ian is projected, so we start with Ian then.
Okay, good afternoon. My name is Ian Onkundi, and I was impeding women's participation in the electoral process in Kenya. The outline of my paper I had an introduction, then I looked at the legal framework, the institutional framework, as well as the factors which impede the participation of women in the electoral process. And then I had strategy recommendations, as well as a conclusion. So to begin, I chose the thematic area on gender justice and the electoral process. So basically, when we talk about gender justice, basically we are referring to full equality and equity between women and men, so that women are given an equal platform as well as men for them to participate in political, economical, as well as the social spheres of life. So in Kenya, there is still inequality when it comes to participation in the electoral process between men and women. So we shall look at the reasons why that is so. So I won't really go into detail on the legal framework, but basically when it comes to the laws, we have laws in place that guarantee the equal participation of men and women in the electoral process in our country. For example, looking at the Constitution, we have Article 10 on the national values and principles of governance. One of the values is democracy and participation of the people. We have Article 27 on freedom from non-discrimination. And even we have Article 7.8, which requires Parliament to come up with legislative measures to ensure that the two-thirds gender principle is implemented. That was already discussed in the morning session. We also have Article 38 on political rights. We have Article 91 on the basic requirements for political parties. So basically one of the requirements is that political parties are supposed to respect and promote human rights and gender equality and equity. We have Article 100 on the promotion of representation of marginalized groups. So Parliament is mandated to come up with legislation that promotes the representation of women, the youth, and persons with disabilities. We also have Article 232, which talks about values and principles of public service. And one of the values is equal opportunity of, when it comes to employment between men and women. So other domestic legislations that we have, for example, the National Cohesion and Integration Act, we have the Elections Act, we have the Political Parties Act, we also have the Penal Code. So all these laws, in one way or another, they have provisions that guarantee the participation of women in our electoral process. Looking at the international framework, we have the UDHR, we have the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights, we have the Convention on Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. We also have the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. So all these international laws also guarantee that women are also able to participate in our electoral process. Looking at the institutional framework, we have the IEBC, which is the electoral management body in our country. We have the political parties, we have the courts, which also play a role. We have civil society organizations, we have the media, and we also have the National Gender and Equality Commission. Move to the next slide. Okay, so I now want to come to the factors that impede the participation of women in our electoral process. So I looked at it in terms of the cultural factors, the political factors, as well as the economic factors. So moving on to the cultural factors, so we find that our society is still largely patriarchal. So it means the society is still male-dominated, and there are cultural factors which present a challenge to women when it comes to their equal participation in our electoral process. For example, we have gender stereotypes. Gender stereotypes, for example, they believe that women are emotional, they are fearful, gentle, irresponsible, weak, so they should not take part in leadership, or they should not hold leadership positions. These are stereotypes and they're not true, and they are there to impede women from participating in the electoral process. We also have repugnant cultural practices. So, for example, you find in some marginalized communities, they have cultures where they say that women cannot speak in front of men and such things. So such cultural practices impede the participation of women in our political process, because if then a woman cannot speak before men, how are they supposed to sell their ideas? How are they supposed to campaign? So forth. So we have also harmful traditional practices. For example, some communities still practice FGM, and you find that women in those communities, if you've not undergone FGM, they regard you as a child. So if they regard you as a child, you cannot take up leadership, you cannot speak, even in front of men. So that is also a cultural factor that impedes the participation of women in the electoral process. We have religion. This was discussed yesterday, so I won't really go much into that. Religion, some religions believe that the man is the head, the woman is the some say the neck, and so forth. So that also brings another challenge. So looking at the political factors, so our political parties, that is basically where people participate in democratic processes. Those are the avenues in which people vie for elective positions and so on. So you find that there's that lack of goodwill from political parties. Some political parties are not willing to give women a platform for them to participate in the electoral process. So that is also a challenge. Then we have the male-dominated nature of our political parties. The leadership of our parties, most of them are headed by men. So women don't have an opportunity to even take up, leadership positions within the parties. So this is also a political factor that impedes their participation in the electoral process. We saw yesterday, like in Tanzania, also the political parties are largely male-dominated. We also have electoral-related violence, mostly electoral-related violence. In most instances, it's directed towards the women and the children. So this is also another challenge. And then lack of support to women once they're elected into office. So you find that even when a woman overcomes these hurdles and they are still elected and they hold political office, there's still that lack of support, from the political parties or even from the electorate generally. So that also presents a challenge in their participation in our electoral process. I'll go to the economic factors. So we know in our country, you have to be economically empowered for you to be able to, even vie for elective positions. So you find that in some areas, in some communities, women are not allowed to control economic resources. So even if it's land, you find that it's in the name of maybe the husband and so on. So women have a limited lack of control of resources. Also, when you look at education, some communities, they believe that only the boy child should be educated and the woman should not be educated. So when women are not educated, that means they're not able to get good employment. If they're not able to get good employment, they cannot be economically empowered. So that becomes a challenge also and hinders their effective participation in our electoral process. So on to the last part of my presentation on strategy recommendations. So we've seen there are key institutions that have a role to play in ensuring that women have, they have a chance where they equally participate in the electoral process as the men. So looking at political parties can ensure that their bylaws do not disadvantage women and they are in line with the constitutional principles on gender equality. The political parties should also give women platforms where they can voice their opinions, their political opinions. They should also support them in their political campaigns. Also, political parties can maybe reduce nomination fees so that to enable more women to participate in party primaries and so on. Looking at the electoral management body, that is the IEBC, when you look at Article 88 of our Constitution, it outlines some of the functions of the IEBC. So IEBC, first of all, has has a role in developing an electoral code of conduct. So they can ensure that in developing this code of conduct, it can be developed in such a way that it also allows women to be able to participate in the process. It can also carry out civic education, basically to educate the public on why it's important for our women to participate in the electoral process. So also within their staff, they can hire more women just to ensure that women are given a chance to also participate in the management of elections in our country. Parliament can come up with legislation, for example, making it mandatory for political parties to abide by the two-third gender rule, maybe when they're coming up with nomination lists and so on. That is one thing they can ensure that they do. Also looking at the media and election observers, the media, this was already discussed before we went for lunch, but the media has a key role to play in ensuring women are able to participate in the electoral process. For example, they can accurately look and report on cases of women discrimination in the electoral process. They can also ensure women are given a platform to participate as journalists covering the election process, to even observe the process, how it is. There's also the conducting of civic education, basically to educate the public on why we need women to participate equally with men in the electoral process. Observers can ensure that they give impartial recommendations based on their monitoring of the electoral process. The media should also avoid gender-sensitive reporting. It should not discriminate in their reporting. For instance, it should not give men more airtime as compared to women. Also, the media also should give a platform to men and women to participate, for example, in election debates, give them a platform for them to air their campaigns, and so forth. As I finish, civil society organizations, this was discussed, but just to finish up, they have a role to play in ensuring, for example, in civic education, in ensuring that they act as watchdogs and they keep the political parties and the government accountable. They can also act as whistleblowers on cases where women are being discriminated when it comes to our electoral process. Yeah, thank you.
Mr. Lwania, Shemoganga, you're here. Who is the brother? What's his name? Cosmos. Yes, please join us. Be ready. Yes. So, Mr. Lwania, you projected? So 10 minutes.
Good afternoon. My name is Joseph Lwania. I'm the project coordinator of an NGO known as Urafiki Kenya. We exclusively work in Ukambani, Makueni. Our offices are at Kibwezi. Kibwezi is 8 kilometers off Nairobi-Mombasa highway, that is to the eastern part. Now, my presentation, that is the topic, Big Men, Election Disputes in Africa. While I was writing this paper, it kept recurring in my mind as to why so many states in Africa, we have presidents, prime ministers, are very reluctant to relinquish power upon the end of their constitutional term limits. What usually happens, or what are the reasons behind this? And it's as a result of this that most African nations have been plunged into political, economic, social, humanitarian quagmire as a result of contested elections. Next. I'm not going to belabor this subject of democracy because since Tuesday we've been sitting here and we've heard a lot on the definition of democracy, various frameworks and all that. Next slide. I'm going to borrow from Bakari, Benloch, and Driscoll. These are three writers on the big man syndrome, where they gave 5 features of the 5 key features of the big man in the political context of Africa. Now, the first one is the role, informally. The big man is rule-bound and is accountable. Second, he maintains authority through reciprocity. We've seen that most of these leaders, after elections, they usually have to reciprocate, especially to their supporters, those people who supported them during the electioneering period or who assisted them in their campaign. They usually reward them, probably by giving them positions in the new government and so on and so forth. Most of these big men are predictable and they are not arbitrary, and the use of public resources by these big men is very, very resolute, and they usually connect small men to power. You'll find that most of these big men, that is through that syndrome, will lift up a very, very small person from a corner and probably elevate that person to become a very senior position in the government. Next slide, please. So I was just looking at some of these former presidents that we have had in Africa, and you see that some of them usually created personalities around them, and they had symbols which they used as characters of power, that is to express their mystical or in form of mystical and mystical terms. During Moi's era, we had that fimbo, that is the fimbo, which was related to the power around him or the force around him, the rungu, the fimbo ya nyayo. Kenneth Kaunda in Zambia had a white handkerchief, always. Kamuzu Banda of Malawi, Jomo Kenyatta of Kenya, both of them had the flying whisk. So these are just some of the symbols that I'm trying to, meaning that portrayed that syndrome that I'm trying to get to. Next slide, please. The African Charter, African Union Charter, Article 17.4, on African Union Charter on Democracy, Elections, and Governance. Now you'll see that it's very explicit. Ensure that there is a binding code of conduct governing legally recognized political stakeholders, government, and other political actors, prior, during, and after elections. And then I want you to pay particular attention to the second part of that article. The code shall include a commitment by political stakeholders to accept results of the election or challenge them through legal channels. Now, the scope of my paper is on 5 African countries that held elections between 1990 and 2020. Now, the first one is Gambia. We had the president, Yahya Jammeh, 22 years. He suffered defeat from his rival, Adama Barrow. 45.5% for Barrow, 36.7% for Jammeh. But look at the third bullet point. Jammeh had once said that he would rule for 1 billion years if Allah willed it. 1 billion years if Allah ruled it. Next slide, please. In Zimbabwe, Robert Mugabe, in office for 28 years. In the 2008 elections, he warned the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission not to announce the results. He had managed 43.2%, Tsvangirai had 47.9%. None of them had scored 50+1. They went to a runoff. But what happened when they went to the runoff? Mugabe vowed never to surrender, and he unleashed one of the most violent crackdowns ever seen in Africa. So what happened to Tsvangirai? Because of this crackdown, especially to opposition candidates, Tsvangirai was bruised and he was in plaster. Next slide, please. Thousands of his supporters were killed, jailed, or maimed. So what happens to Tsvangirai? He withdrew from the runoff, leaving Mugabe to cruise to victory. Next slide, please. Côte d'Ivoire, 2010. Laurent Gbagbo, Alassane Ouattara. First round, what happens? No candidate garnered 50%. Gbagbo 38%, Ouattara 32%. In the second round, what happens? Ouattara wins with 54.1%. Gbagbo gets 45.9%. But then Gbagbo rejected the results. He connived with the friendly president of the Constitutional Council to declare the results invalid. So the international community, ECOWAS and AU came in, and then there was what followed was a bloody and messy civil war. And with most of the world on Qatari's side, Gbagbo fought on, the violence escalated, there was a humanitarian crisis exacerbated by water, electricity supplies, and in April 2011, Gbagbo was cornered, smoked out of his dungeon at State House, paraded in disgrace, arrested, and then Ouattara was finally able to serve as a president. I want you to consider the drama that is happening in this country. The third one, Republic of Congo, 2007. Denis Sassou Nguesso becomes the president in 1979 after a series of coups. So after the fall of the Berlin Wall, Marxism in Eastern Europe, Republic of Congo becomes a single-party country. Oppositions are allowed. We have a referendum in 1992, which marked the end of 28 years of single-party rule. Elections in 1992, Lisoba is elected president. He wins with 61.3%. But Sassou Nguesso, they complain, and so Nguesso forms a militia known as Cobra. Lesuba also follows suit, forms a militia known as Ninja. So these two militias are fighting. And it's a characteristic in most African countries that when a candidate feels insecure, he has to form rebel groups or militias who can always be called, come to his aid in case of need. So what followed? 15 days emergency, 2,000 people are reported to have been killed, and then what happens? Later on in the elections that were done in 2002, Nguesso was declared president. Then lastly, we have Madagascar, Rasiraka and President Ravalomanana. So in this case, we had a second round also because the first round did not have any winner. So later on, because of this pull and push, we had a political crisis that lasted 7 months, but then later on, Rasiraka and his supporters fled the country. So what lessons can this give us, meaning from the 2017 elections in Kenya? What can these other African countries learn? First of all, The rights and grievances of all citizens, including the poor and marginalized, and not just those of the supporters. Then second, protest, but respect the laws and institutions of the land. Then third, encourage participation in the process by all citizens. Fourth, fight corruption, halt the misuse of power. And then the last one is the fifth one, respect and protect the independence of the courts. We saw what happened, Supreme Court ruling of 2017 in Kenya, and in the months that followed, that ultimately led to the handshake of March 28. So I was looking at all these events as they unfolded in Kenya after the elections and thought that probably some of these African countries can learn from Kenya as we held our elections in 2017 to pick one or two or three of what happened in Kenya so that we stop this political, social, economic, and humanitarian crisis that bedevils us in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm reliably informed that Sarah Mukami, where's Miss Mukami? You're here? You ready? Get ready. Thank you. Next. Sir.
Sorry. Good evening, everybody. My name is Dirango Ngonjiri from the University of Nairobi. I'm a PhD student at the university. Sorry. Well, I believe most of us in this room, around 50%, were here in this country 19 years ago. That time, wananchi could arrest a police officer on corruption-related charges, and they could align that police officer to the nearest police station. So this evening, I'm trying to ask the question, what happened? We changed from that. And that's why I'm doing this presentation this evening, so that we can have this discourse together and discuss together. My discussion today is on innovation. Sorry, let's wait for. Sorry, hold on. You can get it from the name. Moderator, I hope my timer is not on. I can assist you while you're done. Thank you so much. There we go. So this evening I'm discussing about innovation practice on legislative oversight on research in fight against corruption in Kenya. I want you to imagine from this photo, this is a dam worth Kenya shilling 38 billion. Have it in your mind. It was paid, it was constructed, and people are drinking water from this dam. It happened in one place in Kenya, and has already been paid. What went wrong for us to have this kind of scenario in a country? In a civilized society, we're able to, somebody who is a professional is able to do this kind of scenarios. Corruption is one of the oldest and organized manner in society, as old as when we had development, as old as prostitution. For those who read the Bible, you know Jesus Christ was sold for 30 cents by Judas. That's when corruption started from. And this is a disease that threatens the hopes of the poor. When you walk around our society in the country, you see the poor people, they lack school fees, they lack medical facilities because of corruption. That's why we don't have water, we don't have dams. That's why we're facing drought as a country due to corruption issues. The government of Kenya, from the mid-1990s, it tried in many ways on how to fight the corruption scenario. If you remember, you have the KEACC and Corruption Commission, several committees has been made, try to fight corruption. But finally, we knew what happened to them. When they are fighting corruption, they also fought back by the same authority that brought them on press. Our parliamentarians, we are entrusted by the Wananchi to bring sanity in this area, to make rules to this society, so that they can try to fight this corruption. But this one in this country doesn't have. Wanjiku is tired. Wanjiku wants change. Wanjiku wants delivery of services in the country. And it's time, high time she's calling that this change should come in this country and we start having legal framework that is working in fighting of corruption in Kenya. Our problem statement, despite enacting all the anti-corruption laws, we still have corruption in this country, and it's still growing in a big way. That's why we're able to have Kenya shilling 38 billion mega scandals, and nobody is taken to court, and nobody is answerable for this kind of scenarios. The judges on this study, the legislators, they can use this study to form their rules when they are doing their rules, and other policy makers in the country, and also we have the management in several circles in the government. They can use the same studies in their making of policies, and the fellow scholars can use the same study in making further studies on this. Our objective is, one, investigate innovative practice that the registries can use to make rules in fighting of corruption, and also examine the relevance of national and county assemblies in fight of corruption. Our study was limited to political and emotional challenges faced by registrators in fight of corruption and making the rules, and also we concentrated more so on understanding the innovative practices that the register is using to fight corruptions. Our methodology, we did a descriptive study design, gather data in particular point, and also investigate the nature of existing conditions that have been there before, because we have many anti-corruption reforms that have been done before, and the relationship between the reforms done before and the current events that are happening now. Our response were from diverse gender, male and female, that in Charles' case, and others didn't disclose their gender, and also age group and education status. The population target of the study was 2,571. This is National Assembly, the Senate, and also the county assemblies in this country. And also our response mainly was drawn from the sample of 98 members, and then we have two members per assembly in the country due to their locality. And random sampling techniques was used, and due to the nature of the study, we were not able to do framework sample. The preliminary data was collected through interviews, while second data was obtained through reviewing and also material from the documents from library and other places. Data was collected through semi-structured, in-depth interviews. Again, most of these details were got, they had a lot of confidentiality in them, and also they need to have a lot of security. Most of the members were not able to disclose the information if it was not secure and they didn't have confidence in it. The answer generated on a recorded interview, because of the time limit in it, the analysis were grouped in common aim, for example, the common trends, questions, perception, and practices in relating to corruption. The analysis was done using SPSS. Our finding, this is something we have talked about, the catcher become the catched. That time, these are corruption officers, they're able to arrest a police officer in this country. And you see, what is the role of anti-corruption officers? Are they empowered to fight corruption in their own way? And finding 59% of the respondents were male, 41% were female, 39% of the respondents were below 40, so means that youth were more. In this study, 88% of respondents had access to technology, so they are able to understand the issue of technology, and 42% were the first-time MPs or legislators in their various houses, 29% were second term, 80% of our respondents were involved in corruption in one way or the other in their life as member of parliament or legislator, and 60.3% do not have political will to implement the rules that they make. The result concurred in the study hypothesis, The results concurred with the study hypothesis that representatives that embrace technology do better in fight of corruptions. In our conclusion, The study-specific protection, which brewers, we don't have which brewers policy, we more rely on the provision of the Protection of Victims and Witness Act and the provision thereof. Open data public policy is not there in the country, and also strengthening of anti-corruption work is minimal in the country. And political interest, we find that most of the registrators has a lot of political interest. They throw in the political interest with their godfathers in the various political parties. Our recommendation, we need to have a system of rewards and incentives, and also have open government and e-government. Yes, we have some services who are open government and e-government. We need to have open government in the issue of IDs, issue of visa, and other areas we need to have e-government services coming on. Management of conflict, we had the mega dam scandal. We need to have a way of managing these conflicts and also improving the democratic engagement. Remember the chicken gate. Somebody in UK has finished the jail term, but in Kenya, they are not jailed. So how should we do in this country and strengthen the multilateral anti-corruption efforts? Our government, most of those who come from the government, don't speak it among itself. They don't have synergy. The right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing. So we need to have the synergy, either in the legislature, in other arms of the government. And also public awareness. Remember that 2003, public were very much aware. What happened, the public is not aware what is happening. In our closing remarks, fish start rotting from the head. I believe most of us have had fish during the lunch break. So if that fish has rotten from the head, you could not have that fish as a meal. So the register is the head in our case. It started rotting from that head as register. If it rots, when you come to the tail, the 190, it is completely rotten. So legislators need to change, and that rotting of fish should stop from there. There are many limitations to fighting on corruption efforts, and this does not mean that this should be there.